I remember the first report as if it were etched into the back of my eyelids. A classroom in a grey schoolhouse outside Pristina. Children hunched over their notebooks. The muffled sound of chalk dragging across a blackboard. And then, one girl. Her name never reached me. It seemed almost erased. Clutching her head, her face draining of colour. She stood, swayed, opened her mouth as though to speak, and fell. The others screamed. It was written in the initial reports as a fainting spell, likely anemia. That was the word used by the authorities. Clinical, dismissive. But when I walked into the hospital later that day, the girl was not alone. 4 others from the same school lay on narrow cots, pale, trembling, their chests heaving as if the air itself resisted them. The nurses muttered about breathless lungs and poisoned air. Parents crowded the hallway, faces tight with terror, asking if their children had been gassed. The smell in that ward was unforgettable. Not blood, not disinfectant, not even the familiar sharpness of iodine. It was metallic, like coins pressed into the tongue. A taste of rust in the throat. By evening, there were more. Children brought in from another school, then another. Some were carried by fathers who kicked open the doors, demanding answers. Their daughters writhed on gurneys, clutching their throats, eyes rolling back. Boys sat rigid, fists clenched, muttering incoherent prayers. I asked one of the nurses how many. She didn't answer. She just raised a hand, 4 fingers, then 5, then 6, as more were dragged through the corridor. That night, the ministry released a statement. There is no evidence of chemical attack. A brief sentence, delivered with the firmness of denial. Yet the halls still echoed with the keening of mothers, the rattling coughs of children, and the shrill slam of stretchers wheeled to fast. What struck me most was the silence between. That tense hush when a child would fall unconscious, when the parents froze, when the doctors checked their watches, waiting for the breath to return. It was in that silence I felt something coil, something wrong that no report could right. The next morning, I visited one of the schools myself. The desk still bore claw marks from where the children had gripped before falling. Chalk dust lay across the floor like ash. A teacher showed me where 3 girls had collapsed, their hair tangled in the legs of their chairs. Her voice broke when she said they had been laughing moments before. I thought of the word hysteria, but even as it formed, it felt like a betrayal. This was not laughter twisted to madness. It was something colder, heavier, a hand pressed to the chest of a city already choking on fear. As I wrote my notes, I heard it, a cough from the empty hallway, sharp and dry. Then another. I followed the sound, but the corridor was bare, sunlight stretching across tiles. Still, the echo stayed in my ears. It was the beginning, and though I did not know it yet, the echo would never leave me. The following week blurred into a single endless siren. It was not just one school anymore. Reports trickled in, then flooded. Towns outside Pristina, villages hidden in valleys, classrooms where children dropped their pencils mid-sentence and slid to the floor. Some convulsed. Others went glassy-eyed, whispering through clenched teeth that something burned in their lungs. I drove to a hospital in Podievo and saw it firsthand. 2 buses had arrived, packed with students who collapsed during lessons. The sight was grotesque in its repetition. Limp bodies carried by frantic teachers, white socks stained from being dragged across dirt, their heads lolling against windows. The nurses had to line them in the hallway because the wards were already swollen with beds. The smell was stronger here, not metallic this time, but chemical, sharp, like burned plastic. Parents pressed rags to their mouths, muttering that it was gas, that the Serbs had released something unseen. No official spoke the word, but it hung in the air like a curse. The children screamed in waves. One boy arched his back so far, I thought his spine would snap. His hands clawed the air, nails splitting as he raked them across the tiles. Another girl sobbed, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," though her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, as though the suffocation was not in her lungs but in her mind. In the chaos, I noticed something unnerving. When one child began to wail, others soon followed, their cries multiplying like sparks catching in dry brush. It was not random. It spread as if carried by sound, or sight, or some deeper contagion of fear. The doctors argued in low tones. Some insisted it was poisoning, that a colorless agent had been released in schools to terrorize the Albanian population. Others muttered mass hysteria, though none dared say it loudly where parents could hear. The word itself was a knife. To call it hysteria was to say their children's agony was unreal, a conjuring of the mind. And yet, no blood tests showed toxins. Number lungs bore damage. By midnight, many of the children sat up again, pale and shivering, but alive, as though nothing had ever happened. I went outside into the cold air to breathe, but the screams followed me. Parents huddled around fires in the courtyard, eyes glinting in the light, whispering about chemicals, about curses, about punishment from God. Some swore they had smelled sulfur in the classrooms. Others said they saw mist curling under the doors. Everywhere, suspicion festered. Was this an attack, an experiment, or something older, something nameless? The tension was unbearable. Soldiers patrolled the streets, rifles slung casually, eyes fixed on us as though we ourselves carried the plague. At checkpoints, they searched our cars, our bags, our notebooks, as if fear could be smuggled. I could not sleep. The thin walls of my rented room did nothing to block the echoes. In the dark, I heard phantom coughing, sharp, brittle, multiplying until it seemed the whole building heaved with it. My own chest tightened. I pressed a pillow to my face and waited for it to pass. By dawn, my reflection in the mirror startled me. Pale, sunken eyes, lips cracked from breathing too shallow. I looked like the children. For the first time, I wondered if I was becoming one of them, infected, if that was the word, not by poison, not by gas, but by the sight, the sound, the dread. And still, the cases spread, one school after another, one bus after another. It was no longer containable. It was a fire, and the city was dry kindling. By the third week, the hospitals were no longer hospitals. They had become holding pens for panic, hallways clogged with cots, stairwells blocked by families camped in blankets, waiting for news that never came. The smell was unbearable, disinfectant clashing with sweat, vomit, and the faint sweetness of fear. I walked into the main ward in Pristina, notebook in hand, and nearly stumbled over a boy sprawled on the floor. His body was twisted sideways, his eyes open and glazed, mouth slack with drool. A nurse rushed past me without looking down. There was no space left for beds. The air rang with constant sound, coughing, moaning, parents shouting names, doctors barking orders that were drowned instantly. And beneath it all, a strange rhythm, waves of screams rising, cresting, then breaking into sobs before another wave began. It was like the whole building breathed as one monstrous lung. I tried to speak with a doctor I recognized, a man named Markovic, his hair plastered with sweat. He gripped my arm hard and said, "It is not poison. Nothing shows in the blood. Nothing." His lips trembled as he added, "But still they come." He looked at the ceiling as if listening. Every hour, more. Then he shoved away, disappearing into the throng. At the far end of the ward, I saw a line of girls in matching uniforms, school skirts torn, lying in sequence on the floor. Their arms jerked at the same angle, their heads twitching side to side, as though pulled by the same invisible strings. I counted 12 of them, all moving in uncanny unison. The sight froze me. It was not random collapse. It was choreography. When I scribbled that word in my notes, my hand shook. Parents pressed against the windows outside, their fists beating the glass. The guards shouted at them to back away, but they would not. Their children's voices leaked through the cracks, thin and desperate. One mother fainted on the steps. Another tore her scarf into rags and pushed them against the door, shouting that the air was poisoned. By then, rumors had spread like smoke. Some swore it was chemical warfare. Others claimed Serbian doctors were experimenting on the children. Still others whispered about curses, about gin or black wines moving through classrooms. Each theory was more fantastical than the last, but none sounded less convincing than the silence of officials. Every day, the ministry released the same sentence: there is no evidence of poisoning. Every night, the hospitals filled again. I began to notice the change in myself. In the ward, whenever a child coughed, my own throat tightened. When a girl clutched her chest, I felt the phantom pressure in mine. At first, I dismissed it as empathy, but then it happened when I was alone, notebook open, hours from the hospitals. A sudden sharp spasm, a dizziness that forced me to sit down. I stared at my reflection in the window, pale skin, sunken eyes, lips quivering. The resemblance to the patient's chilled me. I told myself it was imagination, yet the imagination itself had weight, as though thought alone was enough to summon the symptoms. I am ashamed to admit that when a young boy collapsed at my feet in the corridor, I hesitated, not out of shock, but out of dread that touching him would make his convulsions mine. His small body jerked against the tiles, his heels drumming, and still I froze, pen clutched in my hand. Only when his father shoved me aside did I move. Later, alone in my room, I wrote, "Perhaps hysteria is not weakness, but contagion, a disease without toxin, spreading by sight, by sound, by fear." I tore the page out and burned it in the sink, watching the words curl into ash. Yet even then, I could hear the faint coughs through the walls, though the building was empty. By the end of that week, the hospitals had no more beds, no more space, no more words. They simply overflowed. And still, the children came. By April, the hospitals were battlefields, not of medicine, but of belief. In the waiting rooms, fathers shouted accusations, fists swinging, guards restraining them by their collars. Mothers clutched their children close, rocking, eyes darting to every doorway as though the very air might lunge at them. Doctors argued openly in the corridors, their white coats spattered with sweat, their words barbed. Gas. One group insisted. The tests are flawed. We're missing something. Hysteria. The others spat back. No toxin. No damage. No pattern, but fear. Both sides were wrong, and both sides were right. I remember standing near the stairwell when two physicians nearly came to blows. One slammed a fist into the wall, shouting, "You want to call them liars. You want to tell these parents it's all in their heads." The other sneered back, "Then show me the poison. Show me the chemical. Until then, you're chasing ghosts." Their voices echoed down the hall, feeding the parents' dread. Someone screamed in response, a sharp animal cry, and the ripple spread. Children trembling, mothers wailing, the sound growing into one unified howl. I pressed myself against the wall, notebook half open, and realized that I too was shaking. The chaos seeped into me, a tide I could not resist. Outside, the city itself was splitting. Albanian families whispered of chemical warfare, of deliberate poisoning. Serbian authorities denied it with cold repetition. No evidence, no attack. The tension was already a knife in every household, and now the children's cries sharpened it. Neighbors eyed neighbors with suspicion. Each cough became accusation, each fainting spell proof of conspiracy. And still, no cure, no answer. Only the endless cycle, collapse, convulsion, recovery. As sudden as lightning and as empty as smoke. I returned to one school where the outbreak had begun. The building was closed, guarded, its windows dark. Inside, the classroom smelled of chalk and mildew. Desks stood abandoned, some with notebooks still open. I found a page smeared with frantic scribbles. Not words, just jagged lines that cut through the paper. My hand trembled as I touched it. The grooves were deep, desperate. When I closed my eyes, I thought I could hear it. Faint coughing in the empty corridors, the thud of a body hitting the floor, a girl's voice whispering in Albanian. It burns. I left quickly, but the sound followed me back into the daylight. The journalists I spoke with were divided. Some filed reports of toxic gas attacks. Others dismissed it as mass psychosomatic illness. I found myself trapped between. Too close to the cries to dismiss them, too far from evidence to claim poison. Each article I wrote felt hollow, eaten by doubt even as the ink dried. At night, in my room, I replayed the screams in my head. Sometimes I caught myself holding my breath, waiting for a sound that was not there. Once, I woke with my chest tight, nails digging into my palms, convinced I too was suffocating. Only after several long minutes did the air flow freely again. I told no one. Who would believe a reporter infected by silence? The city whispered. Some said the schools were cursed, that the children had stirred something ancient. Others said doctors were lying, covering evidence. I even heard the word jinn murmured in hospital corridors, half in jest, half in terror. But the strangest moment came one evening. Outside the hospital gates, a man approached me, his coat ragged, his eyes fever bright. He leaned close and hissed, "It is not poison, it is memory." Then he vanished into the crowd before I could ask what he meant. That night, the screams in my head grew louder, and for the first time, I thought I heard them whisper my name. The nights in the hospital were the worst. By day, there was at least the illusion of control. Doctors in motion, charts clutched in sweaty hands, parents shouting, children carried in by the dozen. But when darkness fell and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the walls seemed to breathe. The wards grew strange in their stillness, a stillness that was never still enough. I stayed one night, convincing the staff that I needed to observe. I found a chair in the corner of the pediatric ward, notebook on my lap, though I could barely write. The air was thick with antiseptic and something sourer, the stink of fear clinging to fabric and skin. At first, silence. Rows of children on cots, their faces pale under the white glow, parents sitting vigil with hollow eyes. The hum of lights, the squeak of a nurse's shoes. I almost convinced myself that the crisis had passed. Then it began. One boy coughed, dry and sudden. A girl 2 beds away clutched her throat. Another arched her back, her limbs jerking as though struck by current. Within minutes the ward was alive with it. Bodies convulsing, mothers wailing, doctors rushing, yet powerless. I watched, paralyzed, as 3 children began to move in unison. Their arms jerked upward, their heads twisted sharply to the left, as though pulled by a single invisible string. Their mouths opened together in a soundless scream. For an instant, the entire ward froze, transfixed. Then chaos returned, louder than before. My pen slipped from my hand. I could not move. All I could do was watch as the rhythm spread, row by row, like a wave rolling through. Not poison, not air, but something contagious in sight itself. A fluorescent bulb flickered above me. Once, twice, then out. In that patch of darkness I heard whispers, children's voices, layered, indistinct. They spoke in Albanian, in Serbian, in tongues I did not know. Some begged, some cursed, some simply repeated a single word, again, again, again. When the light returned, the children lay still. Their chests rose and fell, their eyes closed as though nothing had happened. Parents clutched them, rocking back and forth, muttering prayers through clenched teeth. A doctor brushed past me, sweat dripping from his brow. I asked if he'd seen the synchronized movements, the whispers. He stared at me as though he'd lost my mind. "They're sick," he snapped. "That's all, sick." Then he hurried away, leaving me with the weight of my own disbelief. At 3 a.m., the ward quieted again. I walked the hallways, unable to rest. Each corridor stretched longer than it should, fluorescent light reflecting endlessly off white tile. At one point I turned a corner and found a door that I swore had not been there before, unmarked, slightly ajar. From within came the faint sound of coughing. I pushed it open. The room was empty. No beds, no chairs, only bare walls and a window that looked out into darkness. Yet the cough remained, echoing softly, though there was no one to make it. I closed the door quickly and pressed my back against it, heart hammering. The cough continued for several minutes before fading into silence. When dawn finally bled through the windows, the children stirred, as if waking from ordinary sleep. They asked for water, for bread. Parents wept with relief. Doctors scribbled notes. The night's horror was already dissolving in the pale light, but I could not forget the rhythm of those 3 children, their movements synchronized, their mouths open in the same soundless cry. It was not poison. It was not hysteria. It was something else, something that used the children as its stage. By May, the sickness was no longer confined to the schools and the wards. It had seeped into the streets, into kitchens, into the hushed corners of every cafe. Kosovo had become a country of whispers. Everywhere I went, people pulled me aside, desperate to share what they had heard. One man swore had seen soldiers spraying a fine mist into classrooms at dawn. A woman insisted she smelled sulfur near the schoolyard before the children collapsed. Another told me his neighbor's cow had fallen sick at the same hour, as though even the animals were being poisoned. None of it was proven. None of it could be disproven. The authorities repeated their refrain. No evidence of toxins, no chemical agents detected. But their words only sharpened the suspicion. People no longer trusted tests, or doctors, or the government itself. Mothers clutched their children tighter when uniforms passed by. Fathers sharpened old knives and muttered about revenge. In the market square of Pristina, I watched a protest turn into chaos. Parents carried banners painted with crude skulls, demanding answers. They shouted poison, genocide, murderers. When police arrived, the shouting turned to shoving. Then stones flew. The air filled with screams and the sound of breaking glass. I saw one boy faint in the crush of bodies, and instantly the crowd surged around him, convinced it was another attack. The rumor spread in minutes. Gas in the square. I felt it myself, a tightening in the throat, a pressure in the chest. I stumbled against a wall, gasping, but when I forced myself to stand, there was nothing. No mist, no smell, only fear so thick it became physical. Back in my room, I tried to steady my thoughts, but the walls seemed to lean closer each night. The coughs I heard were no longer faint. They came sharp and sudden, as if from the corner of the room. Sometimes I rose, searching the shadows, but there was nothing there, only the echo. I wrote in my notebook, perhaps the mind is more fragile than flesh. Perhaps belief itself is the poison. But then I remembered the synchronized movements in the ward, the whispers from the empty room, the way my own chest had tightened in the square. Belief could not account for that, unless belief itself was something alive, moving from one body to the next. The rumors grew stranger. Some claimed the hospitals were hiding bodies, carted away at night. Others said children who collapsed began speaking in voices not their own. I even heard one tale of a girl who recited passages in Latin, though she had never studied the language. Her words were written down, passed from hand to trembling hand. But when I searched for the page, it was gone. In the cafes, men leaned over their coffee cups, whispering about gin, about curses placed on Albanian blood. In the churches, candles burned long into the night, mothers on their knees begging saints for protection. Even the doctors began to fracture, some calling for exorcists, others demanding international investigation. No one agreed on the cause, no one agreed on the cure. And I, caught in between, felt the sickness creeping closer. One night, as I tried to write, I felt my own breath hitch. My pen slipped, my vision blurred at the edges, black spots blooming across the page. I clutched the desk, waiting for unconsciousness to swallow me. But after a minute it passed, leaving me trembling, drenched in sweat. I stared at the notebook. The page was covered in words I did not remember writing. The handwriting was mine, but jagged, frantic. A single phrase repeated over and over, filling the sheet. It is not over. It is not over. It is not over. I tore the page out, but even as I burned it, the words lingered in my head. Outside, the city hummed with rumor, with suspicion, with dread, and in the distance, faint but clear, I swore I heard a child's scream carried on the night wind. By early summer, Kosovo no longer felt like a place of living. It was a wound, festering beneath the weight of suspicion. Schools closed, their doors chained, yet still the parents would not send their children outside. The streets grew strangely quiet, emptied of laughter. Even the stray dogs slunk away, as if sensing the sickness in the air. Markets where half-deserted stalls stood idle, produce wilting in the heat. People moved quickly, eyes down, as if afraid of being seen breathing. Hospitals swirled with the weight of fear more than illness. Families crowded the corridors, not because their children were fainting, but because they feared they would. Mothers sat in the corners, cradling perfectly healthy sons and daughters, whispering prayers against a poison that could not be found. Fathers stood guard outside with sticks, with knives, some even with guns. At night, the hospitals became fortresses. Police lined the entrances, scanning for saboteurs, but the true enemy was inside, seeping from body to body, unseen. I walked through one ward, my notebook clutched close, and felt the tension like static on my skin. A child stirred in his bed, only shifting in restless sleep, and instantly a ripple of panic passed through the room. Mothers gasped, fathers shouted for doctors, nurses rushed to check his pulse. When they announced he was only dreaming, relief gave way not to calm, but to deeper dread, because if it was not poison, then it was something worse. The rumors were now indistinguishable from reality. Some parents swore the children's eyes changed at the moment of collapse, that the pupils stretched like slits, or that the whites turned black. Others claimed to hear voices speaking through their children, voices too deep, too old. I told myself these were exaggerations, hallucinations born of fear. Yet I could not dismiss the memory of those 3 children moving in unison, their mouths opening in the same soundless scream. Nor could I ignore what was happening to me. I had begun to cough at night, a sharp, tearing cough that left my throat raw. Each time I told myself it was nothing, just the dust, just the heat. But with each fit came the same sensation, a weight in the chest, a tightening that reminded me of those first reports, those first fainting spells. And then came the visions. One night I woke to find words scrawled across my notebook, not by my conscious hand. Of that I was certain. The handwriting was mine, yet distorted, jagged as if carved in haste. The words were fragments. Breathe. Again. It wants to be seen. Another night, I dreamed I was walking the hospital halls. Only the halls stretched endlessly, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. From every doorway came children's voices, rising in a chant I could not understand. When I woke, I found bruises on my legs, as if I had truly walked 4 miles. The city outside was unraveling. Armed patrols roamed near the hospitals, but whether they were there to protect or intimidate, no one could say. Parents accused the police of covering up a crime. Police accused parents of hysteria. Fights broke out in the streets. I attended a town meeting one afternoon where officials repeated their message: no toxins, no gas, no poison. Their words echoed in the crowded hall, but the faces in the room remained carved from stone. Finally, an old woman rose, her voice quaking but sharp. If there is no poison, then why do we still hear the screams? The hall fell silent. The officials had no answer. Neither did I. That night, walking back to my rented room, I felt the silence pressing on me like a hand. The streets were empty, windows shuttered, the lamps weak. And then, from somewhere distant, came the faintest cry. A child's voice, sharp and desperate, carried on the still air. I froze. The sound faded, then returned, closer this time. My heart raced. I turned down an alley, following it, but the street was empty, only shadows and the stench of garbage. Still, I swear I heard it. A single word, whispered in a child's rasping voice. Again. I stumbled back to my room, bolted the door, and sat in the dark until dawn. In the morning, I told myself it was imagination. Yet deep inside, I knew. The breaking point was not just for the city. It was for me as well. And I feared that when I crossed it, there would be no return. By midsummer, the city broke. It began with a scream outside the central hospital, a mother wailing as her daughter fainted on the steps, her small body writhing against the stone. The scream drew others, like sparks to dry grass. Parents surged forward, shouting, demanding help, demanding answers. When the guards tried to hold them back, stones flew. Someone shattered a window. The crowd became a mob. Inside, the wards overflowed with children, many of them not even sick. They lay on cots, on the floor, in their parents' arms, wide-eyed and trembling. Each cough set off a chain reaction. A girl gasped, a boy convulsed, another collapsed. The air was alive with cries, and above it all the ringing of alarms and the pounding of fists on locked doors. I was caught in the chaos, notebook pressed to my chest. I saw a doctor dragged down the corridor by desperate fathers, his glasses torn from his face. Nurses locked themselves in supply rooms. An orderly fled out the back, chased by rumors that he had brought the poison himself. And still, no proof of poison. The officials' voices on the radio grew more strained each day. There is no chemical agent, no attack, no evidence. But no one listened anymore. Belief had hardened into certainty that someone was killing the children. The streets outside burned with fear. I walked through neighborhoods where the shutter stayed closed, where prayers leaked from behind locked doors. In others, bonfires blazed, crowds chanting, demanding justice. Mothers lifted their children high, screaming that they would not let them die in silence. The air itself seemed heavier now, thick with summer heat and something fouler, as though every breath carried ash. And I was no longer certain, I was only observing. The cough had returned, sharper. At night I lay awake, chest tight, hearing the rhythm of my own breath stutter and break. I thought of the children, their synchronized spasms, their soundless scream. I felt it inside myself, the same rhythm waiting to take hold. One evening, in the market square, another outbreak struck. A dozen children dropped within moments, clutching their throats, their eyes rolling back. The crowd surged in panic. I was pushed forward, caught among them, and for a moment I swore the children were not writhing but dancing, their limbs jerking in grotesque unison, their mouths opening and closing in a chant I could not hear. I blinked, and they were only convulsing again, but the image burned in me. That night I dreamed of rows of children filling every street, moving together, their bare feet slapping against the stones in rhythm. Their eyes were hollow, but their mouths were wide, whispering in 1,000 voices, again, again, again. I woke gasping, nails dug deep into my palms, blood staining the sheets. The next day, the riots began. Parents stormed municipal buildings, accusing the government of cover-up, of genocide. Police answered with batons, with tear gas. The city rang with screams, real and imagined. I wandered through it like a ghost, unable to tell which cries came from the streets, and which came from inside my own head. Everywhere I turned, the sickness stared back. Posters with children's faces nailed to doors, mothers clutching photographs as though they were bodies, boys lying on blankets in the shade, too weak to stand, though doctors claimed they were healthy. Healthy, that word had lost all meaning. One afternoon, as I walked past a shuttered school, I heard it again, a faint cough from behind the doors. The building was empty, boarded, yet the sound repeated, steady as breath. I pressed my ear to the wood and thought I heard children whispering, their voices blending into one long hiss. I ran before the door could open. By the end of the week, the hospitals had more guards than doctors. The wards were locked at night, as though keeping something in. The officials stopped speaking to the press, their silence more frightening than denial. And still the children fainted, gasped, convulsed. The city was collapsing, and so was I. I began to hear the whispers even in daylight now. They came from the corners of rooms, from the crackle of radios, from the turning of pages. Sometimes they spoke my name. Sometimes they said nothing but the single word that had haunted me from the beginning. Again, I tried to write, but my notebook filled with jagged scrawls, the same word repeated until the ink tore the paper. I tried to sleep, but the cries of children echoed from the walls, louder than the bells outside. I was no longer certain the sickness was theirs alone. Perhaps it had always wanted me, too. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The fainting stopped. The coughing faded. The cries that had once torn through schools and hospitals, that had filled the streets with panic, dwindled into silence. One morning I walked through the wards and found children sitting up, asking for food. Their faces still pale, their eyes still sunken, but their bodies steady. Mothers wept in relief, fathers clasped their hands to heaven. Doctors smiled weakly, though none dared to say why the plague had retreated. By the end of the week, the beds were empty. Families returned home. Schools remained closed, but the corridors of hospitals, once alive with shrieks, were hollow now, echoing only with the shuffle of weary nurses. It should have been a relief. It was not, because the silence was heavier than the screams. I wandered the streets of Pristina and felt the emptiness pressing against me. The markets were open again, yet people spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting as if afraid to disturb something that still lingered. Children played, but their laughter sounded brittle, as though forced. Every cough, every stumble, drew quick glances, sharp breaths, and I could not escape the whispers. They had grown quieter, yes, but more insidious. No longer the chorus of cries in my head, but something subtler, softer, threading through the silence. When I walked past a shuttered school, I heard faint knocking from within. When I pressed my ear to the wall of my room at night, I thought I could hear breathing, slow and patient, as if something waited on the other side. The authorities declared the crisis over. Mass hysteria, they said at last. A shared delusion of sickness, fueled by fear. Their words printed cleanly in newspapers, repeated on the radio, handed down like scripture. But no one believed them. Not really. In cafes, men still leaned close, whispering of poison, of curses, of hidden experiments. Mothers lit candles at shrines, whispering to saints to keep the sickness away. Fathers sharpened their knives, waiting for an enemy who never appeared. And I wrote, though my writing no longer resembled reports. My notebook filled with fragments, visions, lines written in the dark, without memory of my hand moving. It has not gone. It waits. The silence is only another form of the scream. I tried to show one of the doctors, a man I had spoken with many times. He glanced at the pages and frowned, then closed the book firmly. "You need rest," he said, with a pitying look. "This has affected you, too." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. But the words caught in my throat, because part of me knew he was right. The sickness was not just theirs. It had bled into me. At night I still heard it, faint crying, always distant, always just beyond reach. Sometimes it was the voice of a child. Sometimes it was many. Once, it was my own. And in the rare moments when I managed to sleep, I dreamed of silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of being buried alive. In those dreams, I lay in the ground, soil pressing against my chest, air stolen from my lungs. And above me, muffled but clear, came the sound of footsteps. Children's footsteps, hundreds of them, circling, circling, circling. When I woke, I felt the soil still clinging to my tongue. The city wanted to believe it was finished, but the silence that replaced the screams was more frightening than the screams themselves. Because silence is not an ending, it is only a pause, and I knew, with a certainty deeper than reason, that the scream would come again. I should have left when the fainting stopped. Other reporters did. Doctors too. Once their wards were empty, they went home, back to families, back to cities not poisoned by silence. But I stayed. I told myself it was duty, that I needed to record, to bear witness. But the truth is simpler. I stayed because I could not leave. The city had closed around me like a fist. Even in the quiet, the sickness lived on. I heard it in the creak of floorboards, in the hiss of wind through cracked windows. I saw it in the faces of children on the street, their eyes too large, too watchful. One evening, I followed a sound through the hospital hall's footsteps, light and quick, like a child running. The building was supposed to be empty, but I chased it anyway, my notebook in hand, through corridors, down stairwells, past locked doors. The footsteps always just ahead, never close enough to see. Finally they led me to the basement, to a door I had never noticed before. It was unmarked, its surface scarred by age. I pushed it open. The room beyond was small, windowless, no beds, no equipment, only bare stone and shadows. Yet the sound was there, children breathing, children whispering, though the room was empty. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me. For a moment I panicked, clawing at the handle. Then I heard it, a voice, soft and close, whispering my name. I froze. More voices followed, overlapping, rising, until the room swelled with them. Not screams now, not coughs, but whispers, hundreds of them, all around me, filling my ears, seeping into my skull. They spoke in tongues I knew and tongues I did not, but all carried the same message, again, again, again. I dropped my notebook. Pages scattered across the floor, but the voices poured into me, drowning thought, drowning reason. And in that drowning, I understood. It was never poison, never gas, never hysteria. It was something older, something nameless, something that fed not on blood, but on belief. It had chosen the children because they were open, because their fear was pure. And it had chosen me because I had listened. I felt it then, sliding into my lungs with each breath, coiling around my ribs, threading through my veins, not killing me, not yet, only filling me. When I stumbled back into the daylight, hours later, the city looked unchanged. People walked, markets buzzed, children laughed, but their voices seemed distant, hollow. I picked up my pen again. Though my hand shook, my words were no longer mine. They came in jagged strokes, in fragments that made no sense, and yet told the truth. It is not gone. It waits in the silence. It waits in me. Now, as I write these last lines, the whispers are louder than ever. They come not from walls or halls or shuttered skulls. They come from inside my skull, from the hollow between each heartbeat. Sometimes I hear children's cries. Sometimes I hear my own voice, calling back to me. Sometimes I hear nothing at all, only silence, thick and suffocating, like earth pressing down. But I know this silence is not the end, because even now, in the stillness of the night, if you listen closely, you can hear it, faint but rising, a child's scream, and then another, and another, until the whole city sings again, 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 again.